Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Howard County Conservancy. Just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you've been here before. Wow, excellent. So now that you're all friends of the Conservancy, just want to give you a little appetizer for what's coming in the year of 2020. We are celebrating our 30th anniversary. We have a lot of very special programs that will be published in January. We're going to be actually having a birthday party. I believe it's September, so definitely kind of keep that on your radar. We're also going to be having a special pollinator event in June, so please stay tuned. Check our website for more information. So tonight, we're so glad that you're here for our 7th annual storytelling event. We're so fortunate to have such an event where we are building community by sharing our stories from long ago, from yesterday, all combined together. It's like a woven tapestry. I promise you by the end, you're gonna feel really good about your community when you go home tonight. I do wanna give a shout out of gratitude to the Columbia Association and the Howard County Department of Recreation for supporting this special event. This special event could not have been done without Lee Tillman. Lee Tillman has been facilitating our storytellers for several weeks, and she's been actually doing it for several years. She's hosting a special event tomorrow, a workshop, and you can sign up tonight. That's right, at the table when you came in. We have 5 spots left, and normally the price is $75, I believe. Okay, we're not sure. But because you've already paid your entry fee tonight, there's a discount of $55. So if you sign up tonight, you can get that special deal. The class will be offered tomorrow at Belmont, which is in Elkridge, just across the county. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Lee Tillman up to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Good evening. It's fun to be here a year from when we did this last. On the first cold day, as the light starts to get less each day and the chill more, it makes me think of cultures all around the world, all throughout history, coming together, hunkering down, and letting the stories fly. And that's what we're going to do tonight. So thank you for being here for that. About a month ago, this generous and courageous group, we got together and we talked about what we might talk about tonight. And they have all been crafting and thinking and wondering in preparation for tonight. And in that process, I wanted to share a couple conversations that have come up around stories. Because we've been doing this together for like a few years now. There's a lot of faces in the audience that have come and continue to come. And I want to talk about how stories happen somewhere. Firstly, traditionally in cultures, picturing folks who knew a landscape, were kind of connected to the ground a little more. Oral tradition was a big part of the culture. You had to ground a story before you would begin, was a concept. It had to happen somewhere, past the fallen oak tree where the river starts to turn. And this idea that a story has a place. So as you listen to the stories tonight, notice when you drop in. When a storyteller comes up, the first phrase is, notice yourself orienting. Where am I in time and place? And in this way, stories are grounded. The stories tonight are about sense of place here in the county, sense of home, and this year really about sense of community. That came up really strongly. And just as stories are grounded, the kind of cool flip of that is then the ground, the landscape we share, is full of stories beyond our own. I can remember stories from past years here that still come up as I'm driving past where Nora's story took place or someone else's. And so this idea that our landscape becomes a shared map of not only our own experiences, but our community's experiences. Secondly, where stories happen is between. Someone's gonna come up here having prepped, having thought about, having practiced, but not to perform a speech, to be ready for what will happen between us all, for what will transpire this evening. So yes, stories are shared, stories are articulated, but they are also witnessed and received. We'll hear 6 storytellers, we'll have an intermission, and we'll hear the second 6. So, in being a community that makes the space and takes the time to share in stories, we're going to start with a story by Nancy Lawson. She is the author of The Humane Gardener, Nurturing a Backyard Habitat for Wildlife, and a volunteer naturalist and master gardener in Howard County.
A wire cable is wrapped around the soft bone in my mother's hip. It's there to hold together whatever skeleton remains. Last year, she fell twice on steep steps, and the surgeon who patched her up said that her hip had been crushed, that there were shards of cartilage floating around in her joint fluid. She must have been in extreme pain, he told my dad and me, as we sat crying with relief in the waiting room. There's a cable wrapped around the tallest tree in my backyard, too. It was placed there by a kind arborist who couldn't bear the thought of removing such a beautiful living being before her time. He warned us that taking the tree down would be drastic for all the life around her, the flowers and the bushes and the small trees growing up under her wide canopy. These plants will go into shock with all that sudden light, he said. After his visit, my husband and I chose to let the tree decide for herself how and when she wanted to go. There's a large fracture that splits her trunk almost in 2, but she's still standing, still leafing out at the top, still stretching her arms toward the sky. She's been dropping limbs for years, shedding her burdens whenever the wind blows too hard. But each summer, among the ostrich ferns below, more violets and sedges and black raspberries and pokeberries gather at her base to greet her. In the surrounding gardens, ironweed and serviceberry that once hesitated at the edges of sun and shade are bursting forth from the shadows. As these plants find their feet, their ailing matriarch continues to hang on, sheltering her friends and her neighbors from harsh sun while gradually letting in more light. She's finding the balance between protecting her loved ones and letting them go and grow so they can branch out on their own and in new directions. This summer, a bit further behind our house, hundreds of other trees didn't get that choice. They didn't get to live out their lives naturally until disease or lightning or old age got the best of them. They weren't allowed to say goodbye. On some days, I sat in my home office and I tried to block out the sounds of their deaths, a horrible crashing that was foreshadowed only by a pause in the chainsaws. On many of these days, this happened every 10 minutes. And for most of that long period, a little poodle I was pet sitting sat at my feet and whimpered every time another tree fell. There was little I could do to comfort him. All I could do was close my windows, turn up the music, and weep alongside him. The mass destruction happened for no other reason than money. It was on a steep slope bordering a tributary of the Patapsco River. The landowners behind us took tulip poplars and oak trees and walnuts, some of them probably 200 years old, and sold them off for lumber. By day, I watched the refugees from the former forest behind us make their way into our little habitat. The young raccoon looking lost as he ambled by my window, the American redstarts swooping into the sassafras trees. At night, I lay awake, worrying about the rumbling of tractor trailers that now sounded like they were ripping through our backyard. This was a new noise created by this great chasm of open space where once there were trees buffering the sounds of the highways. I ached for the barred owls and the great horned owls I used to hear calling to each other at night back there, as I thought of the studies showing how hard it is for owls to hunt and find food in the midst of our man-made noise. One morning, after another sleepless night, I got up, went to the computer, and messaged my neighbor, Wayne. He's hard of hearing, but he hasn't been able to escape the sounds of nature being knocked down either. Kiddo, he wrote back, this was inevitable, but I feel your pain. You do what you can. You go out there and you plant the hell out of your backyard. Trees messaged their neighbors too. And I felt hurt for the ones who could no longer do that. The ones who'd had to watch their community being cut off at its knees and hauled away or ground into wood chips. I knew that they would still be trying to converse with and feed their neighbors, their former friends who were now just ghosts. Indigenous cultures have respected these types of relationships between trees for ages, but it's taken Western society thousands of years to catch up. It's only thanks to the brave and pioneering work of scientists like Suzanne Simard in British Columbia that we know so much more about how tree roots and fungi collaborate to send nutrients and water and chemical signals warning of impending insect attack. We know that mother trees can sense who's most in need, and a tree in the sun can send carbon to a tree in the shade, and trees with excess nitrogen can share with weaker trees nearby. We know that dying trees can send their resources to living trees throughout the forest and give all they have to the next generation. Each week I get in my car and I drive from the edge of Howard County toward downtown Columbia to visit my mom and dad. And each week, the crack in my heart grows a little wider as I see more trees toppled and more of that once rich ground underneath scraped clean to make way for more cars and more people. They say we need this highway expansion to get where we're going a little bit faster, that it's all part of a plan for growth. Around the county, and in just a few years, this so-called growth has happened with devastating speed to make way for parking lots and retail and human homes. But what about the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the opossums and the trees who make their home here too? What would the word growth mean to them? When I arrive at my mom's house, she's usually a little bit steadier on her feet than she was the week before. She still leans on us, but she's upright and lively enough to tease my brother about his wild hair or tell tall tales of my teenage hellion years. When I leave, she sends me home with gifts, coasters she picked up in Denmark, or a macrame purse she made in the 1970s. She's like a mother tree in the forest, dispensing her worldly treasures and her words of wisdom to nurture us after she's gone. Except trees in the forest around here, most of them won't get to do that. They won't get to leave that kind of legacy. They won't get to age into snags that shelter bluebirds and owl families. They won't get to lie on the forest floor and decompose into beautiful fungi and woodpecker food and salamander homes. As I mourn the loss of these lives cut short and the habitat that will never be, I strive to honor that mother tree in my backyard by adding to her community and planting new friends around her, like the American hollies my friend Molly gave me, or the sycamores that Wayne just dug up from his pollinator patch by the road. A couple of Saturdays ago, we drove down the street to pick those little trees up from Wayne, and as he helped us load them into our truck bed, he looked at me and said, "Well, kiddo, now you can plant a new forest. And after I die, you can look in your backyard and you can say, that's the Wayne Strait Memorial Forest." I moved to this community because of the trees. I grew to also love the people here. And the question I'll ask until my dying days, until my limbs start to falter and my heart gives way, is why can't we have both?
That last line got me again. Thank you. And thank you for starting us off. Yeah. If you've come before, you might know how I wish we had these long pauses to just sit with what just happened. We're going to add another layer by David Rodriguez, who's a loyal husband, a loving father, a great friend, and a solid citizen.
We landed here 20 years ago. It was my 5th corporate move in 7 years. Bergen County, Middlesex County, Rockland County, Lake County, and now Howard County. We didn't know much about the community, except its proximity to the nation's capital, its vaunted school system, and it was 4 hours from New York City, which was home to friends and family. I knew right away my good fortune in landing here. I grew up in zip code 10455 in the Bronx County. For the first 20 years of my life, I knew that their drug of choice was heroin and then crack. Our police precinct was called Fort Apache. And running out of a burning building, I did that as a child 3 times. We came with my 4-year-old son and my 6-month-old daughter, and we realized that this was a special place. My children were thriving: school, sports, scouting, drama, dance. And my little one was getting ready to go into kindergarten. The company came knocking again. Another promotion, more money, another relocation. I explained to them that this would be my 6th move in 11 years. Truth be told, we knew this was a special place, and we were going nowhere, not yet at least. I told my boss, please understand if I let this one get away. The company acquiesced and let me stay. We kept learning about this great community, its diversity, its geographic location, the school system, and its flaws. The company came knocking again. This time my daughter was in 2nd grade. We were realizing that she wasn't grasping the phonic basics, simple sight words. We knew something was up. And I'm ashamed to share with you that she would try my patience at night when we would sit down to read and do homework. Fortunately, my wife's prescience and suggestion to have her tested, we did. We spared no cost. We found one of the highly regarded child psychologists in the area and had Allison tested. It was bittersweet. The bitter part was that my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia. The sweet part was that we knew the challenge. Now we could support, encourage, and be patient. 2 months later, my boss called. I was sitting in the office, and you can hear the excitement in his voice. A new job opportunity. This one, an assignment in our international office, calling on Latin America. The office in Miami, Florida. Wow, I was floored. A dream job. But how could I? It was in sync with the news that my daughter had a learning disability. My wife and I talked about it, and we decided we're not going anywhere. I went back to my boss and I told him the situation. He understood. I told him, not this one, not now. He let me stay, but tactfully he told me, need not apply for any other promotional opportunities. And I get it, but it was okay with me because I know where we live forges the person we become. If I had moved, my son would not have taken part in the CA Sister City program. Shortly after his sophomore year, during the summer, he spent 2 weeks in Spain, Madrid, Spain. It so happens it was the same summer Spain won the World Cup. My son got caught up in the pandemonium. I am convinced that on that trip, he became a global citizen. He graduated from college with a degree in international affairs, and come this May, he will have a master's in security policy. And what about our Allison? My Allie is a senior in college right now. She's a sorority sister, active on campus, and has been on first-name basis with the university president since freshman year. My Allie has spent the last 2 summers, the first part of the summer, as a camp counselor for children whose parent is afflicted with cancer. This reprieve from the angst, and she loved being there. The balance of her summer, she spent it here in Howard County, working with the Howard County Public School System Extension Program, which is a program dedicated to children with severe learning disabilities. My Allie, too, will graduate in May with a degree in special education, and her hope is that she will come here, where she calls home, and work in the school system, encouraging, inspiring, with a great deal of patience, children with special needs. I sometimes think, what would have unfolded had I taken the promotion and moved? I don't know, I'll never know. But I am certain of this fact, that of the thousands of decisions that my wife and I have made jointly, the one not to move, the one to stay, is the most important one we've ever made. We landed here 20 years ago.
Another layer by Pamela. Pamela Henry is a parent of 4, Aaron, Brendan, Hannah, and Jonah. She's a former teacher for students who are deaf or hard of hearing and has lived in Colombia since 2010 with her spouse, Jill, among the trees. Stories and oral history was the foundation of her childhood and continues the tradition today.
Trees. Trees everywhere. I could walk outside my house, turn in a complete circle, and there would be trees far away, trees close up, big trees and little trees, oak, poplar, maple, and pine. I was raised in a little community called McDaniel, 4 miles west of St. Michael's on the eastern shore of Maryland. I remember waking up in the morning to the sound of my mother's song. She would be singing hymns and show tunes. She'd also cook for us breakfast. She'd cook for my father too, but he was gone to work and he would be back later that day. Now it was our turn for breakfast. My favorite Saturday morning breakfast were pancakes. But they weren't just regular pancakes. They had applesauce in them. Applesauce that perhaps was gotten from my grandfather's fruit trees on the farm. So I'd have a couple. And on the side, maybe some ham or bacon or sausage and scrapple. And a side of scrambled eggs. On that farm, we had animals. We had at least 3 pigs a year, and a couple of sheep, and some chickens and ducks. But those pigs and those sheep were in pens right underneath trees for shade and to camouflage them so we couldn't see them from the house, but we could smell them. We also had pets. We had, dogs, cats, 23 pairs of pigeons, rabbits, to name a few. We also had a garden. Now, the neighbors would say, when we drive by, we can see your father's rows straight, all between them, and no weeds. Well, I know why there were no weeds. When the sun came down just a little bit, my younger brother, sister, and niece would go down those rows, picking those weeds. And then those weeds between the onions and the carrots and potatoes, all of a sudden we'd hear, mosquitoes. So I had to lead them in song. Mosquitoes, doom, 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 doom. Mosquitoes, doom, 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 doom. Bumps, ow, are from the bites of those mosquitoes. And the job was done. Every time there were weeds, we were there. We ate well. We worked hard, but we also played well. I remember a tree in our front yard, a sticky maple tree. My 10-year-old self would take one look at my siblings and take off to get to that tree. And I'd grab the branch and walk my legs up the side of the tree, hoist myself over, and go climb straight up the tree. Sometimes I get there first and sometimes not. But we had lots of fun going up and down that tree. The grass underneath was a little bald from us being there. The tree provided shade, and it just provided comfort to sit and hold that tree and enjoy it. That was during the early part of the day. Later on, when the sun came out, we would head for the woods. We had spring woods, summer woods, fall woods, and winter woods. Now, the spring woods, we would forge a path through the woods. We would kick and shove and pull weeds out of our way, and those sticker bushes would come up and grab our pants leg or our socks or our shoes. We'd continue forward. We could smell the sweet smells of the new buds and the beginning of flowers. I'd look up and I could see the patterns that the top of the trees would make against the sky. We would hear sounds of insects and animals, squirrels and rabbits and birds in the trees. My summer path was just a little deeper. We would go further into the woods. The smells were fresh, the scent of flowers. When I looked up, I couldn't see the sky. The trees were so full. But we still hear the sounds of the animals around us. So we'd find the very best 2 trees, or maybe 3, where the limbs were just hanging so. We'd take other limbs and pile them on top, and take leaves and dump them all over and just leave a little opening in the front so that we could get inside our cave. And we sit there and wait and listen for the animals to go by. And I lay back and look at the cracks in the ceiling of our cave. And sometimes we bring our snacks in there, crackers and water. But we had a great time. Our fall path was a little bit more bouncy because of the trees, leaves that would fall and cover the path. But we would go forward to our favorite places. We'd look at the top of the trees, and I could see the sky again. And we'd sit quietly and listen to the sound of the hunters far away. My winter path was a little muddier, but the feel of the air was cold and crisp. I could see on the tree its limbs and its leaves that were left, frost sparkling and shimmering in the daylight. We enjoyed playing in those woods. As I grew up, I went off to college, finished college, and my first job was in an area, a small town called Vineland. Now, Vineland was famous for its vines, and grapes would be picked and eaten in almost everybody's backyard. Jellies and jams and juice and vino. Well, I enjoyed vino for 3 years before I left because there just weren't enough trees. So I moved to Iowa, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Land spread out so far and wide, and rolling orange tan hills. And on those hills were little huts, little A-frame, single and double framed huts for pigs. There were pigs in those huts. It was hot and cold and no trees. I lasted 4 years and I came back to Maryland. I spent time in a job that I loved. I had a few children raised. I bought a few homes. But it wasn't until 2010 I was introduced to the city of trees, Columbia. And what I was told, my spouse said, there's a community and another community that's connected by paths. When I went on the path, they were made of concrete, asphalt. I could go and sit on a bench, watch the playground, the kids on the playground. There were bridges. I could stand on that path and turn in a complete circle and see trees close up. Hickory trees, evergreens. And I knew, I really knew, I was home.
Our next story is by Yvette Oquendo Baruz, is a family physician and a strong believer of the importance of faith in the healing process.
May 14, 2010, the day I woke up in the intensive care unit at Johns Hopkins Hospital with a rare illness that almost took my life. As a family physician, it was a very difficult and humbling experience to find myself on the side of becoming a patient. I am grateful to God that I survived to tell the story. I've always considered myself a healthy person, but 5 days prior to the Hopkins admission, I found myself in the emergency room at Howard County General Hospital with the most severe pelvic pain I had ever experienced. I spent the night at that crowded ER, remembering the many times my own patients recounted similar experiences. I went home the next morning, but the days that followed, I continued to feel sick, no longer with the pelvic pain, but now I was constantly nauseous and persistently throwing up, unable to keep food down. I thought for sure that I had caught a stomach virus while spending the night at that emergency room. That same week, I happened to have a pre-scheduled appointment with a local gastroenterologist unrelated to the symptoms that I was now experiencing, but I decided to keep the appointment because I figured he's a gastroenterologist, my symptoms were nausea, vomiting, he should be able to figure out what's wrong with me. I had my daughter Sophia take me because I was too weak to drive myself. I remember being surprised when the nurse weighed me and the scale showed that I had gained 10 pounds. I thought, how could I gain weight since I haven't been able to keep any food down for the last couple days? Never, ever suspecting the reason for the weight gain. The gastroenterologist saw me, and he really didn't offer me a diagnosis. He actually looked at me sort of puzzled, and he said, "You look sick. You really should go back to the emergency room." And he just handed me lab orders for me to do. I told him, I'm too tired to go get labs done, but I did promise him that I will go to the emergency room if I continue to throw up, because I figure I probably am dehydrated and it will probably feel good to get some fluids. My daughter took me back home, where my husband Edwin had prepared for me a homemade chicken broth that I took and I immediately threw it back up. My husband became upset because I continued to downplay how sick I was. He took the phone and he called our family doctor, who also happens to be a friend, Dr. Richard Kaladrubitz, told him about my symptoms. And Dr. Kaladrubitz asked me only one question: Yvette, when was the last time you peed? That simple question made me realize, oh my God, it's probably been 4, 5 days since the last time I remember emptying a full bladder. He immediately sent me back to the emergency room, this time by ambulance, where I am told that I'm in complete renal failure. And that's the reason for me not being able to pee and the weight gain. And they also tell me that I have a severe anemia and that I have a very dangerously low platelet count, which explained why my body was covered with deep purple bruises. And by the way, they tell me, you can't stay at this hospital. You're too sick. We have called Hopkins to send an ambulance to transport you there. Overnight, I gained 40 pounds of fluids. The physicians that evaluated me were puzzled by my clinical presentation because I went from being completely healthy to complete renal failure in less than a week. Everything seemed to point towards this rare condition called hemolytic uremic syndrome. Simply put, with this condition, your own body destroys your red cells, destroys the platelets, and the breakdown of the red cells clogs your kidneys, and that's what causes the failure. I remember sobbing uncontrollably the first time they transported me to the dialysis unit after the nurse handed me a binder of information about end-stage kidney disease. It was at that moment that it became real, that, oh my God, dialysis will become part of what I needed to do to stay alive. The nurse, when she saw me crying, approached me and asked for my permission to pray for me. She was joined by the kidney specialist, and she elevated this prayer to God to grant me comfort in this moment of sorrow. That prayer, I can tell you, was the best medicine that nurse could have given me that day, because it really reminded me that I needed to keep my faith in God alive, and also that I needed to stay positive and optimistic. The Hopkins physicians told me that there was a 70% chance that I will have permanent kidney damage, meaning that I will remain needing dialysis. I was happy to know that there was a 30% chance of full recovery. I chose to stay positive and optimistic. They were truly puzzled with my reaction. But you see, I felt blessed that I live in a community where I can count among my neighbors and friends people of all religious backgrounds, Muslims, Jewish, many denominations of Christianity. All of them had united in prayers for my recovery. My pastor, Father Richard Tillman, responded to my plea to come to Hopkins when I requested the sacrament of the sick. My daughters were with me when he administered that sacrament, and I can truly tell you that I felt the presence of God at that precise moment. The next day, my kidneys woke up, and I peed for the first time in 2 weeks. What a joyful moment that was. The doctors were really surprised. Truly, I was not. I really knew, I believed, and the power of prayers was having something to do with the starting of my healing. I told the doctors many times that they did not need to believe what I believe. The one that needed to believe was me. 2 weeks later, I went home with an appointment to continue dialysis as an outpatient. I am grateful to tell you that I never had to go because my kidneys continued to improve week by week. The kidney specialist, Dr. Michael Shoy, continued to follow me for several years. He eventually discharged me from his care because he thought that my kidney function was better than his. So, you see, I feel fortunate that I live in this community that has access to the best possible medical care available. But I give all the glory to God because I really believe, I really think that my full recovery was granted because of His mercy. This experience made me a better person, a better physician, a better Christian that appreciates every single day that God gives me because tomorrow isn't promised. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. All right. Our next thread is going to be brought by Ned Tillman. Ned is an author, an environmental scientist, a native Marylander, and my dad.
When I was in my 20s, I was sent all the way halfway around the world to Isfahan, Iran, to map the geology of a small area of that country. I remember the first morning jumping in my blue Toyota Jeep, zipping across the desert, barren plains up to the first mountain range. I climbed up that mountain, and there was nothing to hold on to, no trees, no shrubs, just rocks and talus piles. And when I got to the very top of that ridge line, I pulled myself over it and was smacked right in my face with this hot, dry wind that instantly sucked up all the moisture off my brow and out of my mouth and my nose and my eyes. I sat there trying to recover from this and listened to the quiet all around me. All I could hear was the blood coursing through the veins in my ears. I then looked down on the path that I took to get to the mountain that day, and instead of just a barren plain, I noticed a whole series of rectangular patterns in the sand. And then it clicked that I was in the center of the Persian Empire, a wonderful area at one point, but now there was no sign of life. And I sat there wondering, what happened to these people? Didn't they know how to take care of the land? Jump ahead 10 years, and I'm speeding up Route 29, trying to get home for dinner. I look around me, and there's all this traffic. And I go west on 108, and then north on Manor Lane, and then up my gravel driveway to my house. And I got out of the car and slammed the door and just took a deep breath. And I noticed the green, lush backyard of the house. And then I looked on the ridgeline to the west, and I was kind of shocked because all the trees that had been there that morning were gone. And I said to myself, what's with all this traffic and all this development? Is anybody keeping an eye on things here in Howard County? That next weekend, I was having breakfast with my family, and I heard a rumble coming up the driveway. And I went outside, and there's this old white pickup truck, and a farmer gets out of it and comes up to my door and says, "Hi, I'm your neighbor. I'm Jim Clark." I didn't know who Jim Clark was at that time. And so I said, "Jim, we're about to have breakfast. Will you join us?" And he came over and saw the homemade bread and homemade jams and said, "Don't mind if I do." Just so happens the following Saturday morning at the same time, Jim comes up the lane. The third time he comes up on a Saturday morning, he didn't get out of the car or the truck. And so I went out to see what the problem was. And Jim said to me, "Ned, jump in. We need your help." What do you do? I waved to Kathy, opened up the creaky door, dusted off the front seat, got the hay off, and jumped in. And Jim drove me out here to Mount Pleasant. And we put up on the grassy lawn, and I jumped out, and I looked at this dramatic tree, the top tulip poplar, that just dominated the front of that old house. And then he pointed across the pasture and said, "See that ridge line? That's going to be all houses in a few years. We need you to come here and help manage it so it doesn't damage the streams on this piece of property over the next few years." And then he started walking down the old stone wall, and I tried to keep up with him, and he started talking to me about the Brown sisters. And then we got down to the creek, the Davis Branch, and walked around the property and ended up on the old stone moorings, which are the foundation of this building. And I was hooked. It was like he talked to me about land preservation and other environmental challenges in the county. And I was thinking that there's a group of people here that really care about these same issues and values that I care about. I wanted to be part of it because maybe I could learn how to take care of a place like this, and maybe even learn how to take care of the county a little bit better. Jump ahead 25 years, and I often get asked to give talks about the environmental challenges of the county and what's been accomplished. One of those talks was at Reservoir High School, Ms. Tadigian's class. It's an AP class in environmental science. And I came and I was talking about some of the accomplishments and some of the challenges the county faces. And there was one smart aleck off to the left, right? No, a young man off to the left, and he raises his hand. And he says, yeah, these sound like great things you've done, but the problems today are global in nature. And I don't think there's anything I can do to help. I think it's futile. That's a tough perspective for me to respond to. I could give him a lot of academic answers and talk about, how none of us are doing it by ourselves. There are people all over the planet trying to help, and that's important for all of us to help too. But, in a lecture, how do you really learn anything from a lecture? I don't think you really can. And so I walked up to him, and I said, I understand, and I can't give you a quick response, but I would like to take you on a walk one day to a place called Mount Pleasant and tell you all about a man named Jim. Thank you.
I hope it's okay if I say the ending changed from 2 hours ago and you nailed it. Thank you, Ned. So in this landscape of stories that we've been dropping in together, that you've been witnessing and receiving, I want to make a moment for you to articulate and share.
The next story being brought into the room is by Jennifer Lewis, who was born and raised in Howard County, and her family owns and operates Jenny's Market in Glenelg. Please welcome Jenny up.
Yes, I am the Jenny from Jenny's Market. Many of you secretary they think I'm Jenny, but in fact, I'm Jenny. You guys got the real Jenny in the house tonight. Now that we got that figured out. It was 60 years ago. The year was 1959. My grandfather, who was never seen without a button-up shirt and tie, was a Baltimore City cab driver. He kept his cab in pristine condition. No dust, no crumbs. Some may think that it was a celebrity limousine inside. It was a fall afternoon when a customer got into his car and slid into the green leather seats and asked to be taken to Western Howard County. My father was unfamiliar with that area, but he was interested to see where his client's destination was going to take him. As he started heading west down the highway, he saw the beautiful trees turning their colors for the fall. He saw them turning red to orange to yellow and the brown leaves on the ground. He saw the gorgeous rolling green hills, miles and miles, and acres upon acres of farmland. Tractors parked at the barn for the evenings. He instantly fell in love. He knew that he was going to move his family from Baltimore to Howard County. I was 12 years old, sitting at my grandparents' farm, under a big oak tree, at a big picnic table that my grandfather had built with his own hands. The sun was setting. The shade of the tree was such a relief from the sun of the day. The mosquitoes were out. I could hear the cicadas making their noises. It was supper time, and it was my job to shuck the corn. As I was pulling the cobs out and pulling each husk off each ear of corn and putting it in a brown paper bag, my grandfather, in his shirt and tie, would come around and tell me to make sure I was getting all the silk off each ear of corn, because he wants to eat corn with silk stuck in the teeth, he would say. My grandfather still today works at this family market, but instead of me shucking corn, it's him shucking the lima beans, sitting on the porch in his chair, putting each lima bean into the pint container, making sure it's filled to the brim, then putting it in a plastic bag, tying it in a knot, and putting it on display for the customers to enjoy, making sure each tomato is turned perfectly, the corn is stacked pristine, no peaches have bruises, and watermelon sounds ripe. He loves making conversation with anyone that comes to him. And I'm sure if you've been there, you've gotten in a conversation with him. It may have been longer than you intended it to be. You probably enjoyed the conversation. My son, who is 10 years old, now works at the stand. I love seeing him work there. He begs me almost every single day if he can go work there. He loves helping the customers carry their groceries and the watermelon to the car in the summer. And in the fall, he carries the pumpkins. This fall, I remember seeing him carry a huge pumpkin that was way too big for him, but he wobbled over to the green wagon with the squeaky wheels and pulled it up to the gravel lot, put it in the customer's trunk with a smile on his face. He wiped the sweat from his brow and skipped happily back to the stand, waiting to see if there was another customer that needed his assistance. It's amazing to see the traits that were taught to me, from my grandfather, to my parents, to me, and now trickle down to my children. I can only imagine what my grandfather feels when he sees the same thing, and for him to reflect and see that one decision he made to move his family 60 years ago has made such an impact on our family and the community. I love that we're able to serve the community and be a part of it, and that my children are actually able to meet such interesting people. It was a summer evening. The market was closing for the night. I was putting the tomatoes in the boxes, and my brothers were watering the flowers for the evening. We heard a car pull into the gravel lot. A door opened and then shut again. A woman came to the stand. She walked by the potatoes, the onions, the broccoli, the spinach, and kale. She came over to us and said, "I didn't come to buy anything today. I simply came for a hug, because you guys give the best hugs."
I woke up to a really annoying sound. When I opened my eyes, I realized I had fallen asleep on the couch, and the annoying sound was one of the talking heads droning on CNN. And I thought, well, why did I do that? Anyway, I sat up on the couch. I started flipping through the cable news channels. I call them infotainment because they're all entertainment. There's no news or information. And I just flipped through them until I got very depressed. I thought to myself, how is this country that I love so much, how did it become so divided? Anyway, I rolled off the couch, had a shower, put on new shorts, t-shirt, grabbed a banana, made a cappuccino, and I thought, I'm going to do something I don't normally do on Saturday, and go down to the lake. So I jumped into the car, and I took off down to the lake. When I got there, the parking lot was full. So I found a place. It was wedged between a Lexus and what looked like a brand new Tesla. This has got to be Columbia. So I pulled into the parking lot, very, very carefully opened my door, and squeezed out of the car. And as soon as I got out, I got hit by this beautiful, bright sunshine. I didn't notice that when I got into the car. And it was just the most beautiful day. I looked up, the sky was blue, dotted with white puffy clouds, gorgeous summer sunshine. A day that you want to last forever. So I started to walk down to the lake, and I heard a commotion. I heard yelling and people clapping and oohing and eyeing. And as I got closer, I saw what they were clapping about. There was someone on a pole. Looked like a woman. She was all dressed up in very colorful garb with plumes of feathers from her hair. And she was juggling and whirring. And the kids around her were going crazy. They were just gasping between all the things she was doing and hoping she wouldn't fall. And I realized, of course, this is Lakefront Festival. So I kept on going down, and the first thing that hit me was the aroma coming from the food trucks. And oh my gosh, it was crab cakes and French fries and hot dogs and hamburgers and I just had a banana, that's it. So I thought, I can't pass this up. So I went over to the food trucks, and you gotta understand, my wife is a vegetarian, so I don't eat a lot of meat at home. So I went straight to the hot dogs. I went there, I got a loaded hot dog, and it tasted so good. It definitely was not good for me, but hey, I don't get this very often. So I savored that. I looked around, and the lake was crowded. I started to walk away and almost ran into two kids fighting over an empty ice cream cone. I looked on the ground, and there was a big blob of chocolate ice cream melting on the pavement. But the lake was spotted with families sitting on the most colorful picnic blankets, all of them just enjoying themselves. I saw grandparents spoiling their grandkids, young parents trying desperately to bring some order to the confusion, the glorious confusion that was going on. But this was awesome. I started walking down, and I heard this voice, and I knew who it was. I met her and dealt with her many times. It was Mary at the ticket booth. And I didn't realize she was a general. She had whipped her army into order, and the patrons were lined up, and she was selling reams of tickets. And she didn't even need a loudspeaker. I could hear her very clearly, but it was great. And then I heard this baritone voice coming from the speaker system. I knew who that was. It was Dick. He had told me once before that he was a radio announcer. Absolutely believe him. He had the voice for it. And he was calling everybody to come to the beginning of the boat races. So I walked down to the lakefront, and there I saw really amazing things. I saw dragon boats, and I saw boats that were dinghies and paddle wheelers. And I thought to myself, my God, what you can do with a little bit of cardboard, duct tape, and imagination. Amazing. And by the way, I also saw some boats that looked like the Titanic because they were half submerged down there. But all of there was groups of people cheering and clapping and taking, all cheering for their teams to get to win this boat race. And I thought, what a curious event, but pretty cool. And I started to walk a little further, and I ran into Bob. I called the finance guy, and his day job, that's what he did. He was a financial consultant. But today, all he was smiling about was all the people that were there, and I knew he was going to have a terrific report to his finance committee, because this was a really awesome event. I kept on going, and I bumped into Nicole. And she was the brains, the creative genius behind this whole event. She was balancing her clipboard with a huge mug emblazoned with the festival emblem on it. And she was just beaming. This is what she had worked for so long. And it was a tremendous success by all accounts. And I realized then that I love this community. I love the people that are here. These people that volunteer endless hours for no other reason but to make this the best possible place to live for themselves, their families, their neighbors, and their friends. This is the country that I love. These are the people that make it so great. And right there, I made a decision. No more cable news, especially on beautiful summer Saturdays.
Our second to last story by Vanessa Deutschman, who's a Columbia boomerang, having left after graduating from Howard High in '83, only to return in 2000 to set deeper roots. Her current passion is exploring what it is that connects people across divides.
I'm 15 years old, standing by the river, and I'm listening very carefully to the safety instructions. Now, we don't expect this to happen to anybody, but if you find yourself out of the raft, in the rapids, the most important thing is that you keep your legs ahead of you, facing downstream, and wiggle your way to the riverbed as fast as you can. Okay. I look around at my 11 classmates who have come on this trip with me, and I don't really know any of them. I know a couple of them by name. That's the cool thing about our outdoor club. It pulls kids from all the different groups. And when we get out there in nature, we all have something in common. And I'm a little freaked out because you see, we had set up camp about an hour away near the Yuggahany River. And then after we set up camp, we found out that the Yuggahany River was closed because it had been raining for days before we left. So I'm standing here in front of the Cheat River, which some people say is a harder river on a good day. I look over at Mr. Pfeiffer. He's got that charming smile on his face, and he's acting really confident like usual. I check out the face of the Howard County Parks and Recs guy, and he's looking pretty serious, but he doesn't seem concerned. And now it's time to get in the river. So we have 2 rafts, 6 kids and 1 adult in each raft, and things are going pretty well until I see the lead raft in front of us, and it has to make this really quick cut from one side of the river all the way over to the other side of the river to avoid a really rough rapid. But in our raft, we're not doing so well. We're really confused by the directions that Mr. Pfeiffer's giving us. Our paddles are going in different directions, and we head straight into this rough rapid, and the raft flips over completely. And all I know, I'm in the cold water, it's dark, I have no idea which way is up, and I have no breath. Then I see a light, because the raft that had flipped over was floating on top of my head, and it hit a rock, allowing the sunlight through. I scrambled to the surface of the water, and now I'm rumbling in the water. Okay, legs in front of me, feet down, toes up, and I see a wedge of a rock facing upstream. I wiggle myself as I can, and I reach, I aim my butt, and boom, I end up right on that rock. Whew, I'm safe. And then I hear, Vanessa, grab my hand. I turn around, and Larry is flying down the river, and he's about to come right next to me, and I hesitate. I mean, if I grab Larry's hand, I'm going to fall right off my rock, and I'm not so sure I want to give up the safety of my rock, and what am I thinking? My God, I must save Larry! And we miss, by what felt like just a few inches. And there's the back of Larry's head, bobbing, weaving in the rough water, right around the bend. What have I done? I get out of the water and make my way. I'm bedraggled and wet and pretty shaken up. Larry got out of the water too. And so did everybody else. And we finished our run down the river, and eventually we got home safely, and we all went our own ways, like we always did. But a part of me stayed hung up on that rock for years. I mean, is that who I am? A hesitator? Somebody who has to figure out my own safety before I reach out my hand to help somebody who really needs me? I mean, what if Larry knew that I hesitated? What would that feel like to him? Would he feel unimportant? What would it say about me? No. I want to be somebody who shows up. I want to be somebody who's ready to reach out my hand. I don't want to miss by inches. So 20 years later, I'm at my high school reunion, very reluctantly. And I'm watching my one and only friend from high school, Alicia. She is in her element. She is a social butterfly. She's laughing. She remembers everybody's names. She remembers stories. I don't know any of these people, and I don't feel connected at all. It's pretty hard to catch my breath. And I see this guy in cowboy boots, and I think he had the cowboy hat. He definitely had a swagger. Hey, Larry, I don't know if you're going to remember me, but I'm Vanessa. Sure, Vanessa, I remember you. Hey, it's nice to see you. It's a funny thing, I remember the story from high school all about you. Oh yeah, that whitewater rafting trip, right? Yeah, that's the one. Oh man, that was a wild trip. You know, we could have really died out there on that river. Yeah, Larry told me all about his ranch in Wyoming and the animals he raised there and how he really liked to go out and hunt. I told him all about my work with Social Justice Theater Company down in DC, and how I was a director of a social justice organization, and now I'm a massage therapist, and I like to help people feel better. We avoided politics, which was probably a pretty good thing. So it was pretty clear that our lives were pretty different. But when we got back on the river, our stories were remarkably similar. Except for one really important thing. Hey Larry, you know, on that day when you were asking me to grab your hand, well, the truth is, I never confessed this to you before, but I hesitated. And I'm really pretty sure that if I hadn't hesitated, I would have been able to grab your hand and help you. And I thought about that for a really long time. Really? That's how you remember it? I gotta tell you, from my perspective, I was flying down that river, and so were you. And you know what I remember? As risky as it was for you, what I remember is that you reached out your hand. Yeah.